Good morning, everybody. Except if you're in out east. Welcome, Kwekwe. My name is Simon Brockape. I'm from Gitigan-Zibi in Anishinaabe, which is about an hour and a half north of Ottawa. And I'm honored to be here today to guide the discussion on best practices, lessons learned for new administrators, principals, vice principals, and leaders, and for not so new. Also, everybody's welcome. I'd like to acknowledge that here in Ottawa, we are on unceded Algonquin territory that my ancestors have walked and lived since the beginning of time. And I want to recognize the traditional territories that all of you are living on today, and encourage everybody to reflect on the territory where you're joining us. I love this territory, and I love Canada for providing us with everything that we need to live as good human beings. So today, we're joined by two experienced leaders in Indigenous education who will share valuable insights to support the growth and success of new administrators in First Nations schools. Their experience will help us navigate challenges and fosters thriving school environments grounded in Indigenous knowledge and values. And just to note that the session is being recorded, and the recording along with a resource package will be shared afterwards and will be on our website. So it's my pleasure to introduce our panelists today. Heather Pennie is the Educational Wellbeing Program Director, bringing over 20 years experience as an educator and principal in First Nations schools in the Manitoulin Sudbury region in Ontario. Currently, she leads literacy and school leadership programming, focusing on the empowering First Nations educational communities through effective literacy strategies and leadership supports. Heather is now the Director of Educational Wellbeing for MFI. And we're also joined with Debbie Michael, a former Maskwacis principal, and who has been instrumental in advancing the MFI literacy programming for fostering both academic achievement and cultural pride within her community. So the two of them are here today to, we've talked about their life experience and their work experience, which they will share with us today. So I'll turn it over first to Heather and then to Debbie.
Miigwech, Simon. My name's Heather Pennie. I'm coming to you today from Sudbury, Ontario, which is part of the Robinson-Huron Treaty. I split my time. Manitoulin Island is actually home for me, and it's where I grew up, and it's where I spent my career in education. I began with fresh out of Teachers College. I went to university in Thunder Bay, and my first job was in Wakumkong First Nation, and I was so excited to be a teacher there. But I think I learned more probably there than anybody did learn from me, just being a beginning teacher as you fumble along. And I moved from there next door to the community I grew up of Asiganac, and was a teacher for over 15 years. I did a lot of work with areas of technology and as a literacy coach. I then kind of fell into administration, and I was vice principal and principal at Little Current Public School and Asiganac Public School, which are part of the Rainbow District School Board. Those schools we're publicly funded provincial schools, though we had tuition agreements with several First Nations in those buildings, and about 50% of our student population did self-identify as Indigenous. And I'm not an expert. A lot of what I learned the hard way. So, but I'm happy to share what I did take away from my mistakes, and I'm going to walk you through I was trying to figure out how to frame this, but I'm going to walk you through a day in the life, or a day in my life as a principal. And these aren't necessarily, they're certainly not the only way to do things. They're how I did things, and just sharing some of the learnings I had along the way. So I'm going to share my screen here. Simon, if you can give me a thumbs up if can you see there should be an MFI logo, and
Yep,
you
perfect.
can see that? Okay. So I am the program director for educational well-being, and our focus is literacy for students in kindergarten to grade 3. And so a principal is really, I feel that the principal's role is as the lead learner of a school. And by modeling that and always being willing to jump in and learn with your staff, it is really much easier to get people to be on board with you. So a typical day for me, I would wake up 5 a.m. Staff would call in sick. Since COVID, that happened a lot more. We had a kind of a rule that you had to call in sick with a phone call, because it's really easy to send a text and just, I don't feel like coming in, I'm going to send a quick text. By actually having the conversation with a person, there was some accountability, but it also helped if a person was, in a really, really dire situation, you could usually hear that in someone's voice and then be there to support them as well. Then you next spend however much time it takes to try and find supply teachers. I found that treating supply teachers well went a really long way. It actually allowed me to, I had a retired 75-year-old principal who would still come in because he said he just liked how happy everybody was, and I gave him lots of chocolate. And so sometimes those little things go a long way to get people to want to come into your school and be a part of your team. In the mornings, I would send out reminders to the community about spirit days, field trips, all those little things. We use social media a lot. We used a program called Seesaw. We used email groups to parents. We also shared information to the band office because they had great channels and their Facebook page, so they shared out information. I found that was really key, so it kept them in the loop as well. And that's kind of how a day would typically start for me. If I had a vice principal, they were a big part of getting a lot of these tasks done in the morning too. I like to get to school early because I said it was the only time of day I actually got anything done before everybody else arrived. I always did a good parking lot test. If I fell down, somebody else was probably going to fall down and get hurt, and I could send a custodians out to sand. In the morning was when I would figure out how many supply teachers we were actually short and how to fill those gaps for the day. And I was also running around making sure that our breakfast program got out. It was work mostly done by EAs, but I always jumped in to lighten the load and help out where possible. And checking in with staff. So this book is called 9 Minutes on Monday. And it talks about really quick and easy ways that you can check in with staff to see how they're doing and build those connections. I will say one of these, my most interesting morning, we were walking through the playground to do early morning check, and we found a can of bear spray and a hunting knife on the playground. And I said, wow, it's a good thing we didn't skip today. Imagine if the students arriving had found that. So that was almost a really bad lesson learned. Luckily, we had gotten ahead of that one. When the students arrive, always, I'm outside. I greet the bus drivers. It really helps catch any things that may be festering on the bus or any concerns they have. It's always a good way to get a lens on the temperature of what your day is going to be. You check in with those students who really need to have someone greet them, kind of read their mood for the day, check in with staff. It was awesome for me. The chief always dropped off her grandson every morning, and so it was a really quick way to check in with her and have those informal conversations, because she was so busy during the day. It was just that, how are things going? Any concerns I should be aware of in a casual way was really helpful. We also had some traffic concerns on the street. I was out there to see things firsthand, deal with any of those. And I think the most important thing was to start the day with some humor and some joy. And especially the parents that sometimes you spend a lot of your time with, trying to have conversations about the good things. The Todd Whitaker book, Dealing with Difficult Parents, this is a really valuable tool that I found, especially when I was starting out. It was also helpful for teachers. And when you praise people, whether it be parents, students, staff, it talks about being authentic and specific, immediate, and private. So our morning literacy blocks, we always started our days with literacy as the most important part of the day. 100 plus minutes. Our literacy blocks were actually 120 minutes every day. We made sure that there was fidelity. So we always said no coloring and literacy. It was really intensive literacy, phonics. We used Haggerty for phonemic awareness. We had U-Fly happening. I was in those classrooms, and if we were missing a supply teacher, I made sure that we had good instruction continue in literacy. So I was often a literacy teacher, especially in the years since COVID, to keep that programming going in classrooms. And another benefit of that, I found staff saw me willing to go in and teach the class. It made it more real, and it showed that that's what I valued because that's what I put the time in. And if I wasn't having to teach, I would go in and work with small groups of students, and supporting however I could so that teachers could do their job of teaching and the students who really needed that extra support could be supported in that time. U-Fly was something that I actually had a team of educators. They championed it. They found the program. I jumped in and learned from them. They actually, in their own free time, took it on because I was supporting them. They took it on. They led lunch and learns. They pulled the other staff on. By the time when I left at the end of last year, they had convinced the kindergarten teachers to also take it up. And the second last week of school, I had 4-year-olds reading books to me in my office. And it wasn't me. I just cleared the path so that staff could do their best work. And did my part, and they really made a huge difference. Lead Like a Pirate is a great book, and I really love the quote that leaders who are swimmers come down off their towers and they get in the pool with their teams. Snacks and recess. A fight will happen and you will spend 2 days investigating and dealing with the fallout. And so my vice principal and I prioritized recess for a lot of reasons. We made sure that at least one of us was always on the yard. And our school day worked that we had balanced days. So we actually had 2 40-minute recess and snack breaks. So 20 minutes of snack and lunch, and then 20 minutes of recess. And this allowed for teachers to have an uninterrupted 40-minute lunch on one of those breaks. It made supervision easy, and it allowed us to schedule our day efficiently to have long enough periods of time for literacy and then numeracy. We had really strict routines for recesses, for navigating the halls. All the staff worked on this to eliminate problems. We had stairs in our school. We, had to set up supervision schedules with staff on the stairs. We spent a lot of time making sure that this was seamless as possible. We often had to model how to supervise. Teachers on the yard like to chat and catch up, but they're not catching things before they occur. We had to model how to, when you see a large group of students huddled around, it's a really good time to jump in there and chat to everybody and see how things are going and see what they're hiding. We were really fortunate. We saw a need. There was lots of problems occurring on the playground, behaviors. And so we were setting up activities for students. We worked with our school council. We decided that Gaga pits would be a great addition to our playground because you can use them year round. They're cost effective and easy to supervise. We actually, Ondekamnakaning, the First Nation, actually we started fundraising efforts. We asked them for help and they bought us 2 Gaga pits. We scheduled it for student use. Students had to create videos on the rules, how to use Gaga pits. And we had an excellent rollout. These were probably the #1 best addition. They've been at both schools I've been at. They were a game changer for student activity. Staff can get in and play, and really, really positive switch for our recess programming. Yeah, lead with culture. Play is not a break from learning. It's endless, delightful, deep, engaging, practical learning. You can develop student leadership through play. You can develop relationships, and it's really a highlight of the day. Another note on recess, though, we do have outdoor cameras at our school, and when things do happen, you can't be everywhere at every moment. The cameras were really, really of benefit if you were investigating serious matters. We also had things like vandalism happen on the weekends, made a big difference, and police could would come in and ask for access for things like that. So just a little aside there. Todd Whitaker's book, What Great Principals Do Differently, has some really, really great advice that I've followed over the years. And the #1 is base your decisions on your best teachers. So when I was looking at data and deciding I needed to make some changes to either literacy or math, for example, I would float some ideas by our teachers, the ones who were really engaged, the ones who were invested, the ones I knew that I could trust, and say, what do you think about this? What if we took a teacher and had them available in the morning to support literacy for tiered intervention, and they took small groups and combined them? This is just an example. What do you think? How do you think that would fly with the staff? And it's really good to have that sounding board and someone who will be honest with you and say, the staff aren't there yet, for example, but here's some ways we can maybe take some smaller steps to get them on board. So it's always my litmus test. And I always had some staff in my mind that I'm going to check and see what their thought is on this. I made sure I was throughout the building all day long. I really was seldom in my office during the school day. Attendance check-ins, we had safe arrival calls where daily attendance, the secretary would call all the parents, but I would also follow up. If we hadn't seen somebody for a few days, I'd check in. Is everything okay? Just making sure, how are they feeling? Showing parents that I'm noticing, but that I'm caring, seeing that how I can support. And then just, getting in the classrooms, doing the walkthroughs. It's just so important. The Principal as Leader of Challenging Conversations is an amazing book. I don't like conflict. Most people don't. It's got some really good suggestions to have those tough conversations with anybody. My favorite one is, I'm sorry to hear this happened. And I'm going to be honest, some days humor is the only way I can get through my day. I would close the door, turn to my vice principal and say, I am so sorry to hear this happened. That's what I told the parent. I really didn't want to hear about this at all. But it goes a long way. And I'm sorry doesn't mean I'm holding the blame. It means I'm listening. I am sorry that this happened on many levels, but let's move forward together and work through this. When working with students, my favorite lines were, did you make a mistake? Because if you ask someone what they did, the answer is nothing. If you say, did you make a mistake? The answer was usually yes. There'd be some tears, and then we could talk about the mistake, because we're human, we make mistakes. It's also a great way to frame it to parents. Your child made a mistake today, rather than, starting with your kid punched somebody in the head. It's not a great conversation opener. Did you make a mistake goes further. Emotion coaching. This is something, there are a lot of resources online. We engage parents and staff in this training. it made it, I don't have enough time to get into it in this presentation today, huge dividends in our school and our school community and our other stakeholders. It works with kids, it works with your own teenagers at home. It also works with adults. As a principal, I spent a lot of time on school improvement plans, reviewing data, and of course, performance appraisals, PD planning meetings, all those other pieces of the day that you have to somehow try and fit in. One way of aligning things though, using a school improvement plan, when someone asks you for money or for PD on something, it's easy to go back and say, does this align with our school improvement planning? And if it doesn't, it makes it a no much easier if it truly doesn't fit with the goals of your school and your board. Dealing with difficult teachers, this one you could use throughout the day. Let's be honest, it happens. One takeaway was always assume that they want to do what is right. So instead of saying, did you call the parent? You can say, what did the parent say when you called? My staff knew when they were coming to me about a behavior problem, they would lead with, I already talked to the parent, because they knew that that was my expectation. And so it's just, and if they haven't yet, I'm sure you're really busy and you haven't had time. How about I take your class and you can go call that parent right now? No, nobody ever said no. They always did. And it showed I was being supportive, and it also meant the parent got called. Calling out the positive, not the negative. Good news, I always tell my staff, good news should be in writing. Bad news needs to be a phone call. If you wouldn't put it on a billboard on the school lawn, don't put it in writing, because that'll come back and burn them. And I always was really, really cautious about that for myself. Dismissal, it's just like the beginning of the day, but in reverse, outside, visible, making sure kiddos get on the bus, making sure they get all the way down the street out of sight, because if a fight happens on the way home, we're still responsible. So I spent a lot of time actually out on the street, making sure kiddos were heading the correct direction and who they should be heading with. And my number one, so there's 2 pillows in the picture. Sorry to call again, Mrs. Burns, but this is the 3rd pillow fight he's gotten into this week. Always call home before the child arrives at home. This was the number one thing when I mentored vice principals, get the message home first, because the child's story will not be the same. It'll be their perspective, and it's usually not what happened. Call home first. And so sometimes we were racing for the phone as the bus was pulling out, but it really, really made a big difference. When I had staff meetings, I had monthly set staff meetings. This book, the 10-minute in service. So I put an example in service number 25 as positive communication with all parents. There's you can open the book. There's 10-minute PDs that you can give in your staff meeting. And it's just so practical. It's not a book of theory. It's a book of, you can open the book and go, what am I going to do in next month's staff meeting? Oh, this aligns with what we're working on. I highly recommend it. I always had standing items on my staff meetings. We always celebrated everything that we could, little wins, like Johnny actually made it outside to recess without, by keeping his hands to himself. We reviewed our school improvement plan. We discussed students at risk. Always snacks. I had to buy out of my own pocket. It was so worth it to show up with some chocolate and snacks. And then we embedded culture. And so we would, for example, have a tea teaching. We would embed those in every staff meeting, because that was what our school valued and was important. And it's great to pull in, if you have staff that want to share, pull them into some of those pieces, as well as community partners. Great time to have someone from the health center come in and present, for example. Community engagement, there's so many things that we do. I always said you had to include the 4 Fs: food, photos, fun, and free. That gets people engaged and kids and parents out. Aligning things with your school priorities, be visible, be engaged. The Your School Rocks, So Tell People book has got some great ideas for social media, different ways you can share about the great things happening inside your school. You need to lift up the veil so that parents know what is happening within the walls of the building. And at the end of the day, you'll notice when I was filling this out, I said, oh yeah, this is where the truth comes out. I really didn't get lunch. Sometimes it was at 6 o'clock. I have self-care at the bottom. It should be at the top. And I'm a do as I say, not as I do. But if I could squeeze lunch in during the day, I would often, if there were kiddos in the office for various reasons, I would have them grab their lunch and we would eat together. I'd eat with my VP or my admin assistant while we were working through some things so that I made sure I was actually eating and not hangry. And it also led to some great conversation time. Always, when you can, end your day or at least your week with positive phone calls home to parents. I kept a running list, especially on Fridays. If you make 5 positive phone calls home, you will have the best start to your weekend. I prioritize that. I had postcards from Vistaprint made up. I designed this one. My staff all designed their own. I paid for them. We'd spent time at a staff meeting. These we would hand out to kiddos, to parents, to anybody. And it was really a good way to get staff to reach out to parents with positive news. I also like to leave them on staff desks. When I was leaving, it's funny, nobody tells you all the great things they like about you until you leave somewhere. But that was one thing that kept recurring, is that, you took the time to write all those little positive notes. They may seem like nothing, but I kept them all. On the bad days, I read through them. So that meant a lot to me. And then on your drive home, have some principal friends or people that you can trust, that you can call on the way home when you just need to debrief. And we kind of had a little network. We would call each other. You could tell when someone was driving home, and we would rehash a problem or ask for advice or just laugh, because really humor can be the best medicine to get through. It's a tough job. And there's days that I felt like, I don't know if I can keep going, but then you kind of think, yeah, and it's also the most rewarding job, because watching kids and parents and your staff thrive and working together to make goals happen and come to reality, it doesn't get much better than that. And every day that you spend with kids is a day well spent.
Thank you. Thank you. That was excellent. I always like reviewing somebody's day. It kind of gets into how do you spend your day? How do you survive? What's the lessons learned? Yeah, thank you very much. So the next speaker is Debbie, and thank you, Heather. Miigwech. Great, Debbie.
Danse Gakia Okinaniskum Tanawa, Debbie Michael Nitsiga son. I am from Alberta. So I guess I will, just start out by saying I'm really thrilled to be here and talk a little bit about my journey. I was asked to present here, so I've put some slides together. I guess for me, just really thinking about leading, I'm coming more from, I guess, that visionary perspective, some of the bigger ideas around leadership. So I loved Heather's presentation. And so I read a lot of those books too. I'm like, I think we'd be really aligned as school leaders. Just a lot of her practice is very similar to mine. But I'm going to take a different approach. So we'll just go to the next slide. I'm just going to talk a little bit about just what got me to where I am today. That's my son when he was quite a bit younger, and my mother who was teaching him how to bead. Beading was always a big focus in our home, something that I grew up. My mom is Cree and comes from the James Smith Reserve in Saskatchewan. She was a survivor of residential schools, so there was definitely impact in our family, and even still to this day. I grew up in Edmonton. She left the reserve when she was quite young. After she broke out of residential school, she said she quit and she wasn't going back, and she was about 16 years old, but then moved out west to start a new life, essentially. So through through what I've learned with my mom, with my family, was number one, family was always most important. She always pushed education with me. She said that was my way to, I think, become an independent woman, something that she really valued. So through my education experience, I graduated from U of A, and then I was a teacher in Maskwacis, Alberta, who some of you may know as MESC now. Back then, I started as a first-year teacher in the Maskwacis Education Authority, which was the Ermineskin First Nation. And so I taught for many, many years, and then moved into school principal, where I was there for 16 years. And we brought in MFI and their literacy project. This was quite a number of years ago now. We had a lot of great results, I think, with some of the initiatives that we had at the school. And I was just really proud of the work that we did as a team there at Ermineskin. After that, I was seconded to MFI and did some of the principal coaching, and that's primarily what I did. So when we had 18 schools in the project, I was helping support principals with their classroom walkthroughs and just supporting them in all aspects of their role. I am still at MESC, and I work there kind of part-time now. I work in the human resources branch, people services. So my role now is really supporting around discipline, teacher evaluations. So lots of work around having those difficult conversations and primarily coaching principals. I also am now a new superintendent in Edmonton, which with the Boyle Street Education Center. It's an inner city school where these are the students that the public system is no longer serving. And these are often our kids that are on the streets and dealing with compound trauma and home issues and so much. And so I'm really proud of that work as well now, what I'm doing. So that's kind of, my background. I've done a lot of work around leadership, and it's something I'm just truly passionate about. But it all stems from my great mama and just her really instilling values. And so today's session is really more about the values that I think guide the work that we do in leadership. I'll go to the next slide. So some of the lessons I learned, especially as a principal, I think when you are looking to initiate any initiative or trying to even get your staff and your student body aligned and working toward the same goal and building a culture, it really does stem from values, and you have to really ask yourself what are your values. And so for me, I didn't know this in the beginning, but I definitely know now. It has to start with me. As the school leader in that building, you absolutely have the most influence, I think, in shifting perspective or shifting beliefs, even influencing people in a really good way, and even influencing people in maybe not such a good way if you're not careful. And so it starts with me, and I had to really and that's what I've been doing as the new superintendent. And I'm going slow because it's my first year with them. I'm doing a lot of listening and observing, and I'm reflecting, and I'm curious. I'm asking a lot of questions, and I'm doing it with respect. I think I have to honor the work that's done there previous to me coming in, especially as a new leader. But I also have to really get a sense of the school, the pulse of the school, and get a sense of the staff and what's important to them, and really understand that. So I think in any leadership position, that ability to listen and be present and to really honor the words that you're hearing, it takes time, but I think it's well worth that time. I also realized that I had a really important role, and that was to influence my team, to influence my community, to influence my students and my parents. And I wanted to empower them, because we know that so many of our First Nations communities are struggling, and we know the hardship, and we know the trauma, and we know all those things that every day can be a challenge for some of our families. How do we empower them? How do we instill hope? How do we inspire them to know that they are capable and that they can achieve great things, and and have that courage to do hard things? And I think for me, that's something I have always kept close to my heart, because I think being in a classroom is hard. I think being a parent, as we all know, can be really hard. Being a student who is maybe coming from, a home where maybe last night wasn't so great, just showing up for school that next day can be really hard for them. So how do we inspire them, and how do we give them a sense of that they matter and that they can still find joy in their day? And so I did a lot of this in terms of just sharing success stories, coming from my heart. I was also really open to having really hard conversations and really just laying it out, and showing my vulnerability too when I didn't always know the answer, or if I was also really struggling, but that we were gonna, find a solution together. But that all can't happen if you don't build trust and connection. And Wakotwin in Cree, of course, is that kinship and that relationship. And we know in our Indigenous ways, and whichever part of Canada we come from, we know how significant this is. We know that this is kind of it's pivotal to everything we do in our communities. And that connection to Mother Earth, that connection to ourselves and to our heart and to our soul, our connection to the people that we love and serve, is important. And so, Heather talked a lot about the practical ways of doing that, and it all comes back. I know the reason she was doing a lot of those things was to build that connection and that trust, and to know that she was the real deal. And like, you are there for the kids, and you are there for the community. And these kids, you guys know, you all know that they can seek out a fake anytime. They know if you're the real deal or not. Are you genuine? Or are you just, just speaking words for the sake of, for whatever? But for me, it's about being truly authentic and being there because you want to be there. And leadership is something I think you have to want, to the point, and you're doing it for the reasons to serve and to help. It's certainly not for the power, and certainly not just for the title. If you're in it for that, then you're really in the wrong profession. Probably need to go into finance or banking. No, I'm just kidding. Because I do think it's leadership, again, especially when we're dealing with, and I say that, I shouldn't say that, but my son's in banking, and anyways, but we have to really, this kind of work to me is, it's in us, it's in your heart, it's in your soul, and you have to honor that as well. So some other key lessons learned on the next slide. We don't have to be the expert, we're always learning. And it comes with humility. And I think, that something I've learned from my Muslim and my Gokum is that value of humility, and just really being open to other perspectives, being open to learning, being open to trying new ways of doing things. I was never somebody who liked to just, like, status quo was just not my thing typically, unless I like to push the envelope and bring the best out in my people. And sometimes that meant pushing a little bit, but doing it in a way that you were learning together. And so often I would say, okay, let's figure this out. I'm curious. If something wasn't working in the classroom, or a teacher was really struggling, it would be okay. It wasn't me coming in and saying, well, you need to do this and this and this. It was more about coaching. One of my favorite things to say was always, tell me more, help me to understand. Because I needed to first listen and really understand their context. And then from there, what have we thought of trying this? What about trying this? and actually getting the teacher to kind of pulling it out of the teacher was always the best way. I never came in to try and just tell them what to do. Compassion. I think teachers, I think children, I think we all need direction. We need routine. It was really important to me that our school was, people knew what to expect from day to day. I did not like just throwing last minute things to our teachers. So I had to say no a lot of times to outside personnel, for instance, or people just wanting to come in on the fly to do a presentation or this or that. I was really respectful of my teacher's time. So I gave a lot of direction, but I always did it with care and compassion. I understood it again, and I think the way I demonstrated that was through listening, with the intention to understand, but I did it with compassion. And so I do think teachers need direction. I think our students need direction, and I think clear, what is it? Brene Brown says clear is kind. And I do think that. I think teachers appreciated that when I was there's things that, when things are just so hairy and chaotic and they don't know what's happening from one week to the next is very hard for teachers to manage. So I always did a Monday, I called it my news flash. I laid everything out for the week. So every Sunday that news flash went out, everything was in there. And if it didn't get in there, we weren't doing it that week. I know it's not ideally, that's what at times things would come up, obviously, but for the most part, I really honored that schedule. And if it's a priority in your school, then make it one. Again, it's like if literacy is your goal that year, if it's whatever the case may be, but when we talk about literacy, how do you need to make it one? It just can't be talk. You have to walk the talk. So for me, it was a constant revisit at every staff meeting. It was looking at our data. It was like, these are the things, we were celebrating. We were honoring our teachers and their work. You've seen it all over our bulletin boards. You've seen it in the classrooms. It was something that I modeled, and I coached teachers in those classrooms. I did a lot of co-teaching, especially with our new teachers. But I'll tell you, it's relentless and it's persistent. I was relentless with what I wanted as a leader. I knew I wanted my kids to read. I wanted them reading by grade 3. That's what I want. I wanted to see that. I was relentless. And I think teachers understood really quickly about what my priorities were. And then to persevere, because it wasn't easy, and I was frustrated at times too. And knowing that there were barriers along the way, and there were things that were getting in my way to do that work. So, but it takes relentlessness and it takes persistence. So if you have priorities, whether it's literacy, and for us, leadership was another one of my priorities. You saw it everywhere. Like, you could come in our school and you could definitely see within minutes what we valued in our school. And of course, our language, our land-based teachings, and a lot of that was obviously really evident and woven into every single thing we did. I think our culture, we started doing like just so many really neat things around literacy and our culture. The Cree language obviously was a priority too, so we really aligned that with the literacy as well. So our Cree teachers and our homeroom teachers worked really closely together. Some of the, I guess, challenges, and I took on the next slide really thinking about, there's many challenges. You guys know, all of you will know. There's probably 100 challenges in every single day as a principal, as a leader, but I wanted to just highlight these 3 areas. And I see it just through my work with MFI when I was visiting schools. I see it currently in a lot of the schools that I've worked in, and it's that shiny effect, I want to call it, and trying to get those quick and fast results, especially when we're talking about literacy. There is not a program. There is not a program that is going to solve your bullying issues. There is not a program that is going to solve your lower literacy skills or your writing or your math or any parent involvement. There's just, there's no, what is it called? Silver bullet. Whatever it is that whatever goal you're choosing to work on, it's hard work. It's relentless work. It's continuous. It is never dropped. It's not just put on paper and then stuffed away and brought back the next year. Your teachers are going to hear it through your messaging every single day. So there is no shiny effect to getting those results that you're hoping for. I wish there was, because you could make millions and millions, I'm sure. And I know you've probably heard this, but I think that especially in our First Nation communities, we're looking for some of that. And really what it comes down to in the school, at least, is having your greatest leaders in front of those teachers, and then your greatest teachers in front of those students. At the end of the day, that's where you got to put your money. Your money is in your staffing, then you need to put the time into them. They're your greatest commodity, and you need to support them. You got to treat them like your prized possessions. I know that sounds bad, but that's not how I mean it. It's just like you got to treat them with just such respect and really pushing them to be their best. And so that brings me to the my next highlight, which is finding balance. This was always my challenge in every single way that you can possibly imagine. It's still today. It's about, how do we find ourselves in education, even though we know there's many colonized practices, but we also are really trying to go back to our traditional ways. How do we find balance in that? How do we push enough that we're getting the results we want, and pulling just enough without, toppling over? So it's about creating that balance. So we know that we don't want to push so much because we know we won't get the momentum. So it's always in that balance of finding just that sweet spot of how much do we push forward and get that, so that it's not so much that it becomes overwhelming and people just check out. We know that there's traditional practices in our schools that absolutely work, and they have to be honored, and they are part of who we are. And that is the beauty, I think, of the work that we do. And it's just something I'm super, super proud of. When you can bring in, those land-based teachings and learning about the medicine and learning about, doing a buffalo harvest, and even just in the classroom and having those conversations that are so, from storytellers and hearing from our elders, there's nothing more magical than that. But we also know that there's these expectations, and there's a way that the school is structured that we are still, kind of working through. We have desks in our classrooms, and we have smart boards, and we have the wonderful technology, and we have all these wonderful ways of bringing learning to life. So how do we balance that? Also, finding the balance between work and home. I worked probably more hours than I can imagine when I was a school principal. I really didn't find this balance very well. I too was eating at 3 o'clock many days. And my kids at home often got the worst part of me, which was probably the yelly, dysregulated mom at times. But I asked them recently, they're grown up now, and they said, no, mom, I don't think they have any bad feelings. So I guess I did okay. But finding that balance and making sure I'm taking care of myself, I didn't always do that well looking back. And if I had time back, obviously, I think I would spend more time taking care of myself. I think the most important thing, though, is we got to meet our students, our parents, and our staff where they're at. This is what I struggled with over and over again. How much do I support my teachers? So in the way of ensuring that they're getting everything that they possibly need, but also setting those expectations and those high standards. I believe in high standards for our kids. I don't believe in lowering the standards. I had a really hard time when I would see teachers allowing students to hand in chicken, I call it chicken scratch, when I knew darn well those kids could produce better work than that, but the teachers were always letting them off the hook. And so I had a really high standard for learning. I also had a high standard for staff, knowing that they could do it, and I held them capable. And I think that was the turning point for me. Was it came, of course, with a lot of praise and believing in them. It also was coupled with that inspiring and empowering them, but then also holding a high standard for them. So it was like, you need to meet me halfway. I see that you're struggling, but can we do this together? So even with our parents, you know, like they needed to understand that we were doing this for the sake of their children. And when they started to see the benefits of our kids reading, you know, when they're coming out of kindergarten and they're reading fluently almost, you know, and grade 1 students are writing 3 pages of a story that has a beginning and a middle and an end. Like that's just incredible. And you get so proud. And once you get that momentum going, you actually, the work becomes easier for you because it speaks for itself. The parents see it, the teachers see it. It's actually quite incredible. And then just that sustainable change. How do we keep that change? I know after I left my principalship, one of my vice principals took on my role. Very proud to say some of that work has sustained. Unfortunately, not all of it has. And I look back and I think, what could have I done different? And it's empowering the leaders that come after you. And I think that's something I'm still working through and still haven't quite figured out how to do all that, but hopefully we'll get there. Just my last slide here is just strategies. Again, I really listened. I was always present. If someone came in my office, my laptop got turned down and my focus was entirely on that person and really listening to hear what they said. I wasn't getting distracted by my phone. I think as soon as you do that and you hear your ding and you're like, oh, just a second. To me, that's not respectful, but it's also just showing that teacher that something else is more important than they are in that moment. And so I really tried to honor my time with my staff. And anytime someone came in my door, they had my full attention. I also learned to give myself grace because I wasn't perfect. I made mistakes. And I also learned to give grace to others. And I think that's, we have to always believe that our teachers and our parents do have the best intentions all the time. And we have to believe that they're coming with good. And that's why it's important to listen. I think we also have to just never assume anything in leadership. I learned that. Never assume, get your facts, hear everybody's story, do not make assumptions about anything. Something I really learned was important for me. And I reflected a lot, and just to continue learning. I think we're constant in a state of reflection as leaders. That's something really important to me. I still do it. And my last one down there, circle of influence. Control, you can only control what's within your circle. Things that were happening, say at chief and council, that were out of my control, things that were happening outside of my school, perhaps were out of my control. And I did not let myself get on a bandwagon and get all worked up about things that were happening outside of my control. So I focused solely on the things I did have control over, which were my attitude, my approach to leadership. I had control over my thinking. I had control over my mood. I had control over my actions, and I had control over the words I used. So that's where my focus lied. And the last slide is yes, and get in those classrooms. If you want to have a huge impact in your school, you need to be in those classrooms, learning alongside those teachers, hearing where all their struggles may be, being part of that. If you're teaching, if you're co-teaching, if you're just there helping students, but get in those classrooms every single day. I scheduled it in. Everyone knew that I was in there. It just became part of my routine. And it was amazing. Some of my best memories as a principal were being in those classrooms. That's all I have for my presentation. I tried to give you the really quick version of my work as a school leader in education.
Miigwech, thank you very much. There's questions coming through the chat, and the first one is, I know teachers, schools, and assistants are struggling with extreme level of anxiety and social emotional learning with students. Is everyone else struggling with these characteristics? And I guess building on that question is I think a lot of what you've already outlined, both of you, address this question, but maybe we can address it directly.
I know for us in Maskwacis, absolutely. We're seeing it with our students. We have, you know, there's a lot of different ways that we have worked through some of that. I will be honest that we haven't been able to be successful with all of our students, even all of our staff. We're seeing a huge amount of our staff on short term. A lot of mental health stuff is coming up. I think it's typical across the country. I think it's a reality that we're facing. We're seeing an increased amount of attendance even from staff. So we're really struggling even with our subbing, a lot of those things. Yes. One of the things though is we've done some accommodations for some of our students. So they may be coming into the Learning Commons for part of their day, just getting them in, and then wrapping our supports around them in whatever way that looks. So learning might not be the biggest priority, especially when I'm thinking of our teenagers. Yeah, so for us, even at Boyle Street, it's about meeting them where they're at once again, and focusing on that. And that takes some investigating, that takes some time, building relationships with the families. I don't think there is a quick and easy answer for that. There's no, again, it takes time. I don't know if there's any other suggestions or here today, but I just know for us, it's dealing with one student at a time.
Yeah, that came across strongly in your presentation, and also Heather, and I can see Heather anxiously wanting to respond to the question too.
Yeah, I've seen, so I was in a K-8 school, and we were sending on average, and this was totally new after COVID, on average, one student a week to hospital to be assessed. And this is a relatively small school, and staff as well, which was leading to absenteeism. I know. And then, you know, as the principal, trying to hold it all together, you need to almost, we're not superhuman. And sometimes it's just being real and honest with staff, not unburdening on them. You can't do that because that doesn't help anybody. But just by showing that you are human and that you really understand and you hear them. In Ontario, the Ontario Principals Council has purchased subscriptions to something. It's called Starling Minds for all of their principals. And it's an online, it's based in CBT, but it walks you through things that are very, very relevant to being a principal. And so questions about, you know, your reactions to different stressful situations, those types of things. And I was, I'm a naysayer. I never thought that I would ever want to do something like that. And on one really bad day, I was like either that or fetal position under my desk, and I tried it. And it was something that I did find some benefit, and I recommended it to other administrators and VPs. Someone asked if we could stick that in the chat. Yeah, and it is something, it's a subscription-based thing, and I think that it's something that boards and things can purchase. I just have to look at it. I think it's starlingminds.com.
Claire posted it.
Oh, she's way ahead of me. Awesome. But yeah, like Debbie said, there's no quick fix. It's about building relationships and checking in on people, and all those rounds of the building constantly. that's how you keep your pulse on how people are doing with their own well-being too.
We had, it's interesting, I'll just talk about a school that I know, there was a lot of change in that school, and the principal essentially had checked out. And it's interesting because they, the teacher, like when we looked at attendance for students and teachers, it was at an all-time low. It was the lowest we'd ever seen. And when we're trying to build up the culture again, and we got in, there's a new principal in there, and just the staff and the students have always said, like, I just felt like I was never seen and I was not heard. And it was really hard for me to hear that, just because it made me so sad. And I thought, see, that's how impactful the leader is. If you're always out of your building, or just not, if you're checked out, or you're also in a space that maybe you can't be all in, you don't realize the impact that has on your building and the people inside of it. They need to know that you have your arms wrapped around them at all times, and that you're invested in it. I can't tell you, I've been in a lot of schools, and you really can get a sense when you come in the school. And one of the things I learned to do, and I invite you all to do this, is just walk in from your building in the morning and just stand there and close your eyes and just listen, and just get still. And just, like, in the middle of the day, I used to do this, and just what feelings are coming to mind, really tapping into that part, that heart, that spirit part of yourself, because you will know what your school needs in that moment. I used to do that a lot when I felt not grounded. If I needed to smudge, or I needed something, but that was always something I did. But if you're not in it, and you're always quick to go to any meeting outside your school, because you just and I see that, like, I'm just being honest. I'm not suggesting anyone is doing that, but it was sad when I saw that in this school, and they just didn't feel seen. And I thought, oh gosh, like, that's all we ever want in this world, all of us to feel seen, all of us to feel that we matter. And that's the gift that you can give the people in your building.
Yeah, Maureen posted something. Did you want to say something, Maureen? We got a few minutes.
Yeah. First of all, Debbie and Heather, that was an awesome job. I didn't know what to expect today, and I like how your two approaches really complemented each other. I just wanted to add, Debbie, the last thing that you were saying about that authentic and genuine approach about I see you and I hear you, that took me right back to I've been involved with the provincial ombudsman person in Saskatchewan for a little while now, assisting with workshops to engage Indigenous people. And what their logo is that I see you, I hear you, and what you say matters. And so, ombudsmen, their job is to hear complaints 24 hours a day from people working in the provincial service. So they have a real high level of anxiety all of the time. And the other thing that the provincial ombudsman person deals with, that kind of addresses what Yvonne mentioned about the extreme high level of anxiety, is this is not new to anybody on this call, I'm sure, but about using the sacred circle, or the medicine wheel, the sacred hoop, whatever you call it in your areas, to think about achieving balance and wellness mentally, emotionally, physically, and spiritually. That is something that has grounded me since I was a new teacher in 1984. But thank you for your presentation so far.
Hey, well, thank you. Any other questions? I'm kind of thinking we've got a another uh, education leaders seminar coming up in February in a few months, and maybe this could be a topic. If people are interested in this, just put something in the chat. Like, just say yes. I think that this is important, because it seems, particularly after COVID, I think we were over COVID, or we thought we were over COVID, but we're not, you know. I think people are just dealing with it now. I personally feel that that kind of thing. I thought I did relaxation, walking, meditation, and all that, and I'm still feeling it. Anyways, being a human being. So thanks everybody. That was really excellent. I didn't really know what to expect, and I thought that these are two people speaking in slightly different ways, but covering the same ground, and I think it's important. And thank you, Maureen, for your comments. So we've got another session coming up in February for new administrators. A second one in January. We've got a First Nations math program best practices, and in March we have our 4th annual Storyteller Award. So keep an eye out for that. We often get excellent, usually around 70 submissions from schools all across Canada about their culture, their language, poems, artwork, videos, puppets, all that. So, and we'll put together a small kit following this. We'll make a list of all the books that that was identified, and email or website URLs. And I just want to thank everybody for this wonderful opportunity to hear all of you. And it's always nice to hear about somebody's lifelong experience and to learn from that, and really to kind of go down a little bit deeper from what they're saying, but also as new principals or new administrators, you're learning from people that have learned a lot, and we can learn a lot from them. So miigwech, everybody. Thank you very much. Have a great day. Take care.